Zara pressed her back against the cold stone wall. Her breathing was heavy and fast. Around her, the sounds of battle filled the air. Metal crashed against metal. Energy weapons buzzed and crackled. The screams of her people echoed through the canyon. The Devourers had come to Kelthera 3 months ago. They arrived in massive ships that blocked out the sun. At first, the Valkani thought they could fight them. The Valkani were proud warriors. They had fought many wars and won them all. Their plasma spears could cut through any armor. Their shields could stop any weapon, but the Devourers were different. They were not alive. They were machines that learned from every battle. Each time the Valkani destroyed one, 10 more appeared. The machines studied how the Valkani fought. They adapted. They improved. Soon the Valkani weapons could not hurt them anymore. Zara looked at her plasma spear. The weapon had been in her family for 500 years. Her great-grandmother had carried it in the War of 3 Moons. Her mother had used it to defend the eastern cities. Now the blue energy that usually flowed through it was weak and flickering. "Captain," shouted one of her soldiers. "They are breaking through the north wall." Zara ran to the edge of their position. Below in the valley, she could see hundreds of Devourer machines moving toward them. They looked like metal spiders, each one the size of a house. Their red eyes scanned the rocks, looking for any sign of life. "How many soldiers do we have left?" Zara asked her Lieutenant Kex. 12, Captain. Maybe 15 if we count the wounded. 12 soldiers. 3 months ago, Zara had commanded 3,000 warriors. They had held the great fortress of Velketh for 2 weeks before the Devourers broke their walls. They retreated to the mountain passes. The Devourers followed. They ran to the desert cities. The Devourers were already there. Now this small canyon was all they had left. This and 12 tired, scared soldiers. "Captain," Kex said quietly, "maybe we should surrender. Maybe the machines will let us live." Zara looked at him. Kex was young, only 25 years old. He had never seen war before the Devourers came. He did not understand. "The Devourers do not take prisoners, Kex. They destroy everything that lives. They turn our worlds into metal and circuits. There is no surrender." A loud crash made them both turn. One of the Devourer spiders had climbed the cliff face. It stood on the rocks above them, its red eyes focusing on Zara. More crashes followed. More machines were coming. "Form a circle," Zara shouted. "Spears out! Today we die as warriors." Her soldiers gathered around her. Their faces were dirty and tired, but they stood straight. They held their spears ready. These were good people. They deserved better than this. The first Devourer spider dropped into their circle. Zara's spear cut deep into its metal body. Sparks flew. The machine fell, but 2 more took its place. Then 5 more. Then 10. Zara fought like her ancestors had taught her. She moved with grace and power. Her spear danced through the air, cutting and stabbing. But there were too many machines. For every one she destroyed, 3 more appeared. A metal claw struck her shoulder. Pain shot through her arm. Another claw hit her leg. She stumbled but kept fighting. Around her, she could hear her soldiers falling one by one. Kex screamed as a Devourer's energy beam hit his chest. Old Marin, who had fought beside Zara's father, disappeared under a pile of metal spiders. One by one, her people died. Finally, only Zara remained. She stood in the center of the circle, surrounded by broken machines and fallen friends. Her plasma spear was almost dead now. The blue energy was barely visible. 3 Devourer spiders circled her slowly. Their red eyes studied her movements. They had learned how she fought. They were waiting for the right moment to strike. Zara raised her spear one last time. "I am Zara Velthon, daughter of the mountain clans, keeper of the old ways. I will die with honor." The machines moved toward her. She struck at the first one, but her spear was too weak. The blade barely scratched its metal shell. The spider's claw hit her spear in the center. The ancient weapon, passed down through 5 centuries, cracked. Then it broke. The 2 pieces fell from Zara's hands. She looked at the broken spear on the ground. This was how it would end. The last of the Valkani warriors would die with a broken weapon in a forgotten canyon. There would be no songs about this battle. No stories for children. The Devourers would make sure of that. The machines moved closer. Zara closed her eyes and waited for death, but death did not come. Instead, there was a sound like thunder. A bright light filled the sky above the canyon. Zara opened her eyes and looked up. Something was falling from the stars. It was on fire, trailing smoke and sparks behind it. It was too small to be a Devourer ship, too strange to be Valkani. The object hit the ground 50 feet away with a tremendous crash. Rock and dirt flew everywhere. The devourer spiders turned toward the crash site, their red eyes scanning for threats. Smoke poured from the wreckage. Then something moved inside it. A figure climbed out of the burning metal. It was wearing strange armor that Zara had never seen before. The armor was white and blue with odd symbols on the chest. The figure stood up slowly. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a build similar to a Valkani but different somehow. Through the smoke, Zara could see its face. The skin was pale, the eyes were small and round, and there was no crest on its head like Valkani had. This was not a Valkani. This was something else entirely. The stranger looked around the canyon. It saw the dead soldiers, the broken machines, and finally Zara standing among the devourers. For a moment, their eyes met across the battlefield. Then the stranger did something that surprised everyone, including the machines. It raised a black weapon and started shooting at the devourer spiders. The weapon made a sharp cracking sound, completely different from Valkani energy weapons. Whatever it fired hit the machines hard enough to knock them backward. The stranger moved while it fought, rolling and jumping in ways that seemed impossible. One of the spiders turned to attack the newcomer. The stranger did something Zara had never seen before. Instead of standing and fighting with honor, it ran away. But it did not run in fear. It ran in a pattern, leading the machine toward a pile of rocks. When the spider followed, the stranger threw something small and round. There was a bright flash and a loud bang. The devourer spider stopped moving, its red eyes dark. The other two machines moved toward the stranger. Again it ran. Again, it used tricks and tools instead of fighting directly. Within minutes, both machines were destroyed. The canyon became quiet. The stranger walked toward Zara, lowering its weapon. It said something in a language she had never heard before. The words were short and quick, nothing like the flowing sounds of Valkani speech. Zara stared at this creature that had fallen from the sky. It had destroyed 3 devourer spiders in minutes using methods she did not understand. It fought without honor but with great skill. Who was this being? Where had it come from? And why had it helped her? The stranger said something else and pointed to itself. The word sounded like Jake. Zara pointed to herself. Zara, the being called Jake, nodded and said her name back to her. Then it looked around the canyon at all the destruction and death. It said something else that sounded sad and angry at the same time. Zara did not know what would happen next. But for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. Jake looked around the canyon and felt sick. Bodies were everywhere. The alien soldiers had fought hard, but they never had a chance. The machines had torn them apart. He knelt beside one of the fallen warriors and checked for signs of life. Nothing. The being looked almost human, but taller and with strange bone ridges on its forehead. Their armor was beautiful, covered in flowing designs that reminded Jake of ancient Celtic art. The female warrior who had introduced herself as Zara was still alive. She stood about 20 feet away, watching him with suspicious eyes. Her weapon was broken on the ground beside 2 pieces of what looked like a high-tech spear. Jake's translator device was damaged in the crash, but it was still working partly. He could understand maybe 1 word in 5 of what she said. Not enough for real conversation, but better than nothing. He walked back to his crashed ship and started pulling out equipment. His recon vessel was small, built for speed and stealth, not combat. But it carried enough weapons and supplies for a week-long mission. Jake grabbed his rifle, 3 grenades, a medical kit, and his emergency food pack. When he turned around, Zara was right behind him. She moved like a cat, completely silent. She said something in her flowing language and pointed at his rifle. The translator caught the word weapon but missed the rest. Gun, Jake said, holding up the rifle. Shoots bullets. Kills bad guys. She repeated the word gun with a thick accent. Then she pointed at the broken machines and said something else. The translator caught more and coming. Jake nodded. Yeah, I figured. We need to move. He started walking toward the canyon entrance, but Zara grabbed his arm. Her grip was strong, stronger than any human woman he had ever met. She shook her head and pointed deeper into the canyon. No, she said in broken English. Devourers, many. The translator was learning her language quickly. Jake was starting to understand more words. Where do we go? He asked. Zara pointed up at the canyon walls. There was a narrow path carved into the rock face, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Safe place. Others. Others meant more survivors. That was good news. Jake shouldered his pack and followed Zara up the hidden path. The climb was hard. The rock was loose and crumbling. More than once, Jake almost fell, but Zara moved up the cliff like she was walking on flat ground. She kept looking back to make sure he was still following. After an hour of climbing, they reached a cave entrance hidden behind a wall of rocks. Zara moved 3 specific stones and the wall slid aside. Ancient technology, Jake realized. This hiding place was old. Inside the cave, Jake found 15 more survivors. They were all wounded or exhausted. An elderly male with scars on his face stepped forward. He looked at Jake and said something sharp and angry. Zara answered him quickly. They argued for several minutes while the other survivors watched Jake with frightened eyes. Finally, the old male nodded. He said something to Jake that the translator picked up as "Welcome, Skyfallen One." Jake learned that the old male was named Corvex. He had been a general before the war. The others were mostly soldiers, but there was also a young female who seemed to be some kind of scientist or engineer. Her name was Mira, and she was very interested in Jake's equipment. She examined his rifle with careful hands, asking questions in rapid-fire speech that the translator could barely keep up with. "How does it work without plasma?" she asked. "Where is the energy source?" Jake tried to explain gunpowder and bullets, but the concepts seemed strange to them. Their weapons all used energy. The idea of throwing small pieces of metal at high speed was new. Corvex asked Jake many questions. Where did he come from? How many of his people were there? Did they have ships and weapons? Jake tried to answer, but it was difficult. How do you explain Earth to someone who has never heard of it? How do you describe humanity to an alien race? "My people are far away," Jake said slowly. "Very far. Across many stars. We fight wars too. Different enemies, but we fight," Corvex nodded. "You are a warrior." "I am a soldier," Jake corrected. "We have many soldiers that seem to interest them." Zara asked how humans fought their wars. Jake thought about how to explain it. These people seemed to fight with honor and tradition. They stood in lines and fought face to face. It was brave, but it was also stupid against an enemy like the machines. "We fight to win," Jake said finally. "We use tricks, we hide. We attack when the enemy is not ready." Corvex looked angry. "That is not honorable." "But it works," Jake said. Over the next few hours, Jake watched the survivors and learned about their situation. They had been hiding in this cave for 2 weeks. They had very little food and water. Their weapons were almost out of power. They were waiting to die. The Devourers controlled everything. The cities were gone. The military was destroyed. These 15 people might be the last free Valkani on the planet. Jake studied their weapons and equipment. The technology was advanced, but it was all designed for traditional warfare. Stand-up fights between armies, not guerrilla warfare against machines. "Show me your weapons," Jake said to Mira. She brought out several devices. Plasma rifles, energy shields, some kind of grenade launcher. All very sophisticated, but all running on low power. "Can you modify them?" Jake asked. "Make them work differently?" Mira looked confused. "Modify how?" Jake picked up one of the plasma rifles and examined it. "This shoots energy, right? In a straight line?" "Yes." "What if it shot in many directions?" Like, Jake tried to think of the word. "Like a flower opening?" Mira's eyes widened. "A scatter pattern?" "Yes." "And what if we could make the energy balls explode after a few seconds, even if they miss?" For the first time since Jake had arrived, Mira smiled. "That is possible. Difficult, but possible." Jake spent the rest of the day working with Mira and explaining human tactics to Corvex and Zara. At first, they resisted. The idea of running from a fight went against everything they believed, but Jake showed them how it could work. He drew pictures in the dirt explaining ambushes and hit-and-run attacks. He taught them about creating distractions and using the enemy's strength against them. "The machines learn from fighting you," Jake explained. "They study how you fight and adapt, so you have to keep changing. Never fight the same way twice." Zara was the first to understand. "We have been fighting the way our ancestors fought, but our ancestors never fought machines." "Exactly," Jake said. "New enemy, new tactics." That night, as the survivors tried to sleep, Zara sat beside Jake near the cave entrance. She had been practicing English words all day. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Jake thought about it. "Because you needed help. Because it was the right thing to do. But we are not your people." Jake looked at her. In the dim light, she almost looked human. different but not so different that he could not recognize the pain in her eyes. On my world, we have a saying, when good people are in trouble, you help them. It does not matter what they look like or where they come from. Zara was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke again. The Devourers came from nowhere. They destroyed everything. We thought we were strong, but we were not strong enough. You were strong enough to survive, Jake said. That is what matters now. But for how long? There are only 15 of us left. Jake looked out at the stars through the cave entrance. Somewhere out there, beyond those alien constellations, was Earth. Were there humans still fighting their own wars? Were they wondering what had happened to Lieutenant Jake Morrison? Maybe there are more survivors, Jake said. Maybe we can find them. Maybe we can teach them what I taught you today. And then, Jake smiled. It was not a happy smile, but it was determined. Then we make the machines wish they had never come to your world. The next morning, they would begin planning their first attack. Jake would teach the Valkani how to fight like humans. He would show them that honor was not about how you fought, but about what you fought for. And maybe if they were very smart and very lucky, they could start taking their world back, one machine at a time. 2 weeks had passed since Jake fell from the sky. The cave had become a workshop and training ground. Every day, Jake taught the Valkani new ways to fight. Every night, Mira worked on modifying their weapons with parts from Jake's crashed ship. The first lesson had been the hardest. Jake had explained the concept of retreat. Running away is not cowardice, he told them. Running away is strategy. You run to a better position. You run to fight another day. You run to lead the enemy into a trap. Corvex had been angry. Valkani warriors do not run from battle. Then Valkani warriors die in battle, Jake replied. I have seen your warrior code. It is beautiful. It is honorable. But it does not work against machines. The argument had lasted hours. But finally, Zara supported Jake. She was their leader now, even though Corvex had more experience. The others followed her decision. Jake taught them about cover and concealment. He showed them how to use rocks and shadows to hide from the machine's sensors. He explained how to set up crossfire positions and escape routes. Most importantly, he taught them to think like the enemy. The Devourers learn from every battle, Jake explained. But they learn in patterns. They expect you to do what you did before, so you have to do something different each time. Mira had been Jake's best student. She understood both the technology and the tactics. Working together, they had created new weapons that the Devourers had never seen before. The first was a modified plasma rifle that shot energy balls in a scattered pattern instead of a single beam. The second was a proximity mine made from Valkani shield generators and human explosive compounds. But the most important discovery had been accidental. Jake had been working on his damage translator when Mira noticed something strange. The device was sending out low-level signals that seemed to confuse nearby Valkani equipment. Your mind works differently than ours, Mira explained. The patterns are more random, more chaotic. They tested this theory carefully. When Jake concentrated on random thoughts, the effect became stronger. Valkani technology near him would flicker and sometimes malfunction entirely. This is why the Devourers had trouble targeting you in the canyon, Zara realized. Their sensors could not lock onto your brain patterns. Jake grinned. So I am naturally confusing to machines. That is probably the most useful superpower I could have asked for. They decided to test their new tactics with a small raid. Intelligence from other refugee groups had revealed a Devourer supply depot 20 miles south. It was lightly guarded, mostly automated. Jake wanted to take only 5 people, but Zara insisted on bringing 8. They argued about it for an hour before reaching a compromise. Fine, Jake said, but we do this my way. No heroic charges. No standing and fighting. Hit and run. The team consisted of Jake, Zara, Mira, Corvex, and 4 other soldiers. They traveled at night, using paths that Zara knew from her childhood. The Devourers had excellent sensors, but they focused on roads and obvious routes. The supply depot was exactly what Jake had expected. A central building surrounded by automated defense turrets. 2 Devourer spiders patrolled the perimeter in predictable patterns. In human warfare, we would study this place for weeks, Jake whispered. Learn every detail. But we do not have weeks. He pointed to different positions around the depot. Mira and Tovin, you place the mines here and here. Zara and I will create a distraction on the north side. When the guards move toward us, Corvex takes his team through the back entrance. What if the guards do not move? Korvax asked. They will, Jake said confidently. Machines are predictable. The attack began at midnight. Jake and Zara opened fire on the north turrets with their modified weapons. The scattered plasma shots confused the targeting systems just as they had hoped. The two patrol spiders immediately moved toward the attack. They had been programmed to respond to threats with overwhelming force. As soon as the spiders moved, Mira triggered the mines. The explosions knocked out two more turrets and created a gap in the perimeter defense. Korvax led his team through the gap. They moved quickly using techniques Jake had taught them. Stay low, move fast. Do not stop to fight unless you have to. Inside the depot, they found weapons, power cells, and something unexpected. 3 Valkani prisoners. The prisoners were barely alive. The Devourers had been experimenting on them, trying to understand how organic brains worked. One of the prisoners was a young female named Kira who had important information. There are others, she whispered to Korvax. Hidden settlements. The machines have not found them all. This changed everything. Jake had assumed that their small group was all that remained of the Valkani. But if there were other survivors, maybe they could build a real resistance. The team escaped with the prisoners and as many supplies as they could carry. The whole operation took less than 30 minutes. By the time Devourer reinforcements arrived, they were already miles away. Back at the cave, Kira told them about the hidden settlements. Small groups of survivors were scattered across the planet. Most were in hiding, too afraid to fight, but some were organizing. They are using the old emergency communication system, Kira explained. Short-range transmissions between mountain peaks. The machines cannot detect them because they use natural rock formations as amplifiers. Jake was impressed. Your people are more resourceful than they first appeared. Over the next week, they made contact with 4 other groups. The largest had almost 50 people. Combined, they might have 200 survivors willing to fight. Jake began training instructors. He taught Zara and 3 other soldiers how to pass on human tactics to the other groups. Each settlement would become a training camp, but he also worked with Mira on a bigger project. If his chaotic human brain patterns could confuse machines, maybe they could amplify that effect. What if we could record your thought patterns? Mira suggested. Store them in a device and broadcast them? Like a confusion bomb? Exactly. Something that would scramble Devourer sensors and targeting systems. They worked on the device for days. It required components from both human and Valkani technology. The power requirements were enormous, but Mira found a way to use Valkani energy cells in parallel. The first test was spectacular. When Jake activated the prototype device, every piece of Valkani equipment in the cave stopped working for almost a minute. It works, Mira said, excited. But the range is limited. Maybe 100 meters, that is enough, Jake said. Hit-and-run tactics work best at close range anyway. They began planning their next operation. The Devourers were building something massive near the old capital city. Aerial reconnaissance from other resistance groups suggested it was some kind of transmitter. They are calling for reinforcements, Korvax realized. More machines from other worlds. Jake studied the intelligence reports. The construction site was heavily defended. Hundreds of machines worked around the clock. Direct assault would be suicide. But Jake was not thinking about direct assault. He was thinking about sabotage. We do not need to destroy it, he explained to the group. We need to change it, modify it. Make it work for us instead of them. How? Zara asked. Jake smiled. It was a dangerous smile, the kind that made experienced soldiers nervous. We are going to send a message, he said. A very loud message to a very specific destination. The plan was ambitious and extremely dangerous. They would need to coordinate attacks from multiple resistance groups. They would need perfect timing and a lot of luck. But if it worked, they would not just damage the Devourer forces on Kelthera. They would call for help from across the galaxy. They would call for humanity. Jake had no way of knowing if his message would reach human space. The distance was enormous and his knowledge of galactic navigation was limited. But he had to try. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was showing up uninvited to fights that needed them. And this fight definitely needed them. The resistance had grown beyond Jake's wildest expectations. Word of the successful raids had spread through the hidden communication network. Valkani, who had been hiding in caves and ruins for months, were suddenly ready to fight again. Zara stood on a cliff overlooking the valley where the Devourer transmitter was being built. Beside her, Jake studied the massive structure through his damaged binoculars. "It is almost finished," Zara said. "The machines work faster than we thought possible." The transmitter was 3 times larger than any building Jake had ever seen. It rose from the valley floor like a metal mountain, bristling with antenna arrays and power conduits. Hundreds of devourer machines swarmed around it like metal ants. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. "Mira estimates 2 days before it becomes operational," Zara replied. "Maybe less." Behind them, 50 Valkani warriors waited in the mountain passes. They were the best fighters from 6 different resistance groups. Each one had been trained in human tactics. Each one carried modified weapons designed by Mira, but 50 warriors, even well-trained ones, could not assault a target defended by thousands of machines. "Tell me again why we are not trying to destroy it," said Commander Thane, the leader of the largest resistance group. Jake had explained the plan a dozen times, but some of the Valkani still did not understand. "Because we cannot destroy it," Jake said patiently. "It is too big and too well defended. But we do not need to destroy it. We need to reprogram it." The plan was complex and dangerous. Instead of attacking the transmitter directly, they would target the control nodes that manage the construction. Mira had identified 12 key points where small teams could plant her modified devices. These devices would not destroy anything. Instead, they would inject new programming into the transmitter's control system. Programming that Jake had written based on his knowledge of human communication protocols. "If this works," Jake continued, "the transmitter will send our message instead of the devourer call for reinforcements." "And if it does not work?" Thane asked. "Then we probably die," Jake admitted. "But your people are dying anyway. At least this way we take a chance." The attack would begin at sunset. 12 teams of 4 warriors each would approach the valley from different directions. They would plant their devices and escape before the machines could respond. At least that was the plan. Jake would lead one team directly to the main control center. This was the most dangerous assignment because the main center was deep inside the transmitter structure itself. "I should go with you," Zara said. "No. You need to coordinate the other teams. This only works if everyone hits their targets at exactly the right time," Zara argued, but Jake was firm. She was a better leader than he was. The other Valkani would follow her orders without question. "Besides," Jake added, "someone needs to survive to tell the story if this goes wrong." 3 hours before sunset, the teams moved into position. Jake's team consisted of himself, Mira, and 2 young warriors named Jorik and Nala. They were siblings who had lost their entire family to the Devourers. Jake had chosen them because they were angry enough to be dangerous, but disciplined enough to follow orders. The approach to the transmitter took 2 hours. They moved carefully, using every piece of cover available. Jake's confusion device helped scramble the machine's sensors, but it had limited range and battery life. As they got closer to the structure, Jake realized how truly massive it was. The base of the transmitter was almost a mile across. The top disappeared into the clouds above. "How do we get inside?" Nala whispered. Jake pointed to a maintenance access port about 50 feet up the outer wall. "Mira says that leads to the main power routing station. From there we can reach the control center." The climb was treacherous. The metal was smooth and offered few handholds. But Valkani were natural climbers, and they reached the access port without being detected. Mira worked on the lock while Jake watched for patrol drones. The Devourers used flying machines to monitor the perimeter, but they followed predictable patterns. "Got it," Mira whispered. The access port slid open with a soft hiss. Inside the transmitter, the corridors were filled with cables and conduits. The air hummed with electrical energy. Everything was clean and precise, built by machines for machines. They moved through the passages like ghosts. Jake's military training helped him navigate the complex layout. He had studied similar structures during his time in the human fleet. The control center was exactly where Mira had predicted. It was a large chamber filled with processing units and data terminals. At the center of the room was a massive holographic display showing the transmitter's construction progress. 97% complete, Mira read from the display. "We are almost out of time." Jake pulled out the master control device that Mira had built. It looked like a small metal box covered in blinking lights. Inside was a recording of his brain patterns and a complete communication protocol for reaching human space. "How long will this take?" he asked. 15 minutes to upload the new programming. maybe 20. 20 minutes was a lifetime in a place like this, but they had come too far to give up now. Mira connected her device to the main terminal and began the upload process. Jake and the others watched the entrances, weapons ready. Outside, the other teams were beginning their attacks. Jake could hear explosions in the distance as the Valkani hit their assigned targets. 5 minutes into the upload, alarms began to sound. The Devourers had detected the sabotage attempts. "How much longer?" Jake asked. 10 minutes, Mira replied, sweat beading on her forehead. The first Devourer patrol found them 7 minutes later. 3 spider machines burst through the main entrance, their red eyes scanning for targets. Jake activated his confusion device and opened fire. The chaotic brain patterns scrambled the spiders' targeting systems long enough for Jorik and Nala to destroy them with modified plasma rifles. But more machines were coming. They could hear metal feet clanking through the corridors outside. 6 minutes, Mira announced. More Devourers appeared at 2 different entrances. Jake's team spread out to cover all the approaches. They fought desperately, using every trick Jake had taught them, but the machines kept coming. For every one they destroyed, 2 more appeared. 3 minutes, Mira called out. Jake's rifle was almost empty. Jorik was wounded, bleeding from a gash on his arm. Nala was down to her last power cell. A massive Devourer unit, twice the size of the others, appeared in the main entrance. It had been designed for heavy combat, with armor that their weapons could barely scratch. "I cannot stop it," Jake shouted to Mira. "How much longer?" 90 seconds. The heavy Devourer charged into the room. Jake threw his last grenade, but it barely slowed the machine down. The Devourer's energy cannon was charging, preparing to fire. Then Zara burst through a side entrance with 5 other warriors. She had disobeyed Jake's orders and followed his team into the transmitter. "You humans are terrible at following your own plans," she shouted as she opened fire on the heavy Devourer. Together, they managed to bring down the big machine just as Mira announced, "Upload complete," but their celebration was short-lived. Dozens of Devourers were converging on their position. "We need to get out of here," Jake said. "The upload is not enough," Mira replied. "Someone needs to manually activate the transmission. It requires a conscious mind to initiate." Jake looked at the control terminal. The activation switch was simple enough, but anyone who stayed behind would not escape alive. "I will do it," Korvek said, appearing behind Zara with the rest of the rescue team. "No," Jake said. "This is my plan, my responsibility, and my world," Zara replied firmly. "My people." Before anyone could argue further, the young warrior Nala pushed past them all and grabbed the activation switch. "My family is dead because of these machines," she said. "Let me do something that matters." She pulled the switch before anyone could stop her. High above them, the massive transmitter came to life. But instead of calling for Devourer reinforcements, it began broadcasting Jake's message across the galaxy. A message that carried the coordinates of Kelthera, and a desperate plea for help from any friendly forces in range, a message that would travel faster than light, racing through space toward a small blue planet that most of the galaxy had never heard of. A message that would reach Earth in approximately 3 months. The team escaped from the transmitter as Devourer forces closed in. Nala stayed behind to make sure the transmission continued, buying them precious time with her life. As they reached the valley rim, Jake looked back at the transmitter. It was still broadcasting his message, but for how long? And even if the message reached Earth, would anyone believe it? Would they come? Jake did not know. But for the first time since his ship had crashed on this alien world, he allowed himself to hope. Because if there was one thing he knew about humanity, it was this: they never abandoned their own, and somehow, against all odds, these brave aliens had become his own. 3 months had passed since the transmitter raid. The Devourers had tried to shut down the broadcasts, but Mira's programming was too deeply embedded in their systems. Every day, Jake's message continued to beam across the galaxy. The resistance had grown stronger. There were now 8 active cells with over 300 fighters. They had learned to move like shadows, striking fast and disappearing before the machines could respond. But the Devourers were adapting too. They had brought in new types of machines, ones specifically designed to hunt small groups. The war was escalating. Jake stood on the roof of an abandoned building in the ruins of the old capital. Below him, the streets were empty except for patrolling machines. The Devourers had turned the once beautiful city into a metal wasteland, Any word from the outer settlements? Zara asked, climbing up beside him. Thane's group hit another supply convoy yesterday. No casualties on our side. Jake lowered his binoculars. But the machines are getting smarter. They are using decoy convoys now. They learn from every encounter, Zara agreed. Just like you said they would. Jake had taught the Valkani well. They fought like humans now, but they had kept their warriors' courage. The combination was deadly effective. Mira appeared at the roof access, breathing hard from the climb. Jake, you need to see this. The deep space monitors are picking up something. They followed her down to the Resistance's hidden command center. It was built in the basement of what had once been a library. Ancient Valkani books shared shelf space with human-designed weapons. On the main display screen, Mira showed them a series of energy readings. These signals started appearing 2 hours ago, she explained. Multiple sources, approaching from the direction of your home system. Jake felt his heart stop. Ships? Big ones. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Outside, emergency sirens began to wail. Not Valkani sirens, but the harsh mechanical sounds the Devourers use to coordinate their forces. They detect the ships too, Zara said. Jake grabbed his rifle and equipment pack. We need to get to the high ground. If those are human ships, they will need a beacon to find us. The team of 30 fighters moved through the ruined city toward Mount Kella, the tallest peak in the region. It would take them 6 hours to reach the summit, but from there they could signal any incoming ships. The journey was dangerous. Devourer patrols were everywhere, searching for the source of the Resistance broadcasts. Jake's confusion device helped hide them from sensors, but they still had to fight their way through 3 checkpoints. At the second checkpoint, they were almost caught. A group of hunter machines had been waiting in ambush. Only Korvex's quick thinking saved them. The old warrior had learned to think like a human tactical officer. Set up crossfire positions, he ordered. Make them come to us. The hunters fell into the trap perfectly. They approached the building where the Resistance fighters were hiding, expecting to find them on the first floor. Instead, the Valkani attacked from 3 different directions, using the overlapping fields of fire that Jake had taught them. By the time they reached Mount Kella, the energy readings were much stronger. Whatever was coming was big and getting closer. There, Mira pointed to her scanner readings. 5 ships, maybe 6. They will be in orbit within the hour. Jake set up the signal beacon on the mountain's highest point. It was a combination of human and Valkani technology, designed to broadcast on frequencies that both species could detect. As the sun set behind the mountains, the first ship appeared in the sky. Jake had never seen anything like it. The vessel was enormous, bigger than any human ship he knew about. But the design was definitely human, angular and practical, built for war. How many ships do your people have? Zara asked. I have no idea, Jake admitted. I have been gone for 3 months. A lot can change in that time. More ships appeared. Jake counted 12 vessels of various sizes. Some looked like warships. Others appeared to be transports or support vessels. The largest ship moved into low orbit directly above their position. Then something smaller detached from it and began descending toward the planet. Landing shuttle, Jake said, hardly believing his own words. They are actually here. The shuttle touched down in a clearing near the mountain base. It was sleek and white, with the symbols of the United Earth Fleet painted on its sides. Jake and his team approached carefully. Human or not, these people were strangers to this war. The shuttle's ramp lowered and figures in white armor emerged. Jake recognized the design immediately. These were human soldiers, but their equipment was more advanced than anything he had seen before. The lead figure removed her helmet, revealing a young woman with short brown hair and lieutenant's stripes. Lieutenant Morrison? She called out. Jake stepped forward, barely believing this was real. That is me, the woman saluted. Lieutenant Amy Porter, UEF Special Operations. We got your message, sir. Command sent us to extract you. Extract me? Jake laughed. Lieutenant, we are not going anywhere. These people need our help. Amy looked confused. Sir, our orders are to retrieve you and gather intelligence about the alien threat. We are not authorized to engage in military action. Jake pointed back toward the city, where explosions lit up the night sky. The Devourers were attacking civilian shelters again. Lieutenant, those machines have destroyed an entire civilization. They have killed billions of people. And they are planning to spread to other worlds. Sir, that is not our mission. Jake looked at Zara, who was watching the exchange with interest. Even with the language barrier, she could sense the tension. "Then I am refusing extraction," Jake said firmly.
"I am staying here with these people." Amy stared at him.
"Sir, you cannot refuse a direct order." "Watch me." Before Amy could respond, Mira's voice crackled over their comm units. "Jake, we have a problem. The Devourers are launching everything they have. Hundreds of ships all heading for orbit." Jake looked up at the human fleet hanging in the sky. The Earthships were powerful, but the Devourers had been building up their forces for months. "Lieutenant Porter," Jake said urgently, "your ships are about to be attacked by an enemy that learns and adapts in real time. They will study your weapons and develop countermeasures within hours." Amy pressed her hand to her earpiece, listening to reports from the fleet. Her expression changed as she heard the warnings from her ship's sensors. "Admiral Barnes wants to speak with you," she said finally. The conversation with Admiral Barnes was brief, but decisive. Jake explained the situation on Kelthera, the Devourer threat, and the tactics that had proven effective against the machines. "Admiral," Jake concluded, "these machines will not stop with this world. They spread like a plague, consuming everything in their path. If we do not stop them here, they will eventually reach Earth." There was a long pause before Barnes responded. "What do you need, Lieutenant?" "Ground support. Your ships can handle the Devourer fleet, but you need people on the planet who understand how these machines think." "And you think these aliens can provide that?" Jake looked at Zara, who was preparing her fighters for what might be their final battle. "I know they can, sir. They have been fighting this war for months with nothing but courage and determination. Give them real weapons and support, and they can take their world back." The space battle began 20 minutes later. Jake watched from the mountain as human and Devourer ships exchanged fire in the darkness above. The human weapons were impressive, but the Devourers adapted quickly. Then something unexpected happened. The Devourer ships began to malfunction. Their formations broke apart as individual vessels lost power or changed course randomly. "What is happening up there?" Zara asked. Amy was listening to fleet communications. "Our ships are broadcasting some kind of interference pattern. It is scrambling the enemy targeting systems," Jake grinned. "They are using my brain patterns, the ones Mira recorded." The confusion signal that had worked so well in small-scale raids was now being broadcast by the entire human fleet. The Devourers, who relied on networked coordination, were thrown into chaos. Within 2 hours, the space battle was over. The surviving Devourer ships fled to other systems, leaving their ground forces stranded on Kelthera. But the war was far from finished. There were still thousands of machines on the planet's surface. "Now we finish this," Jake said. The final assault on the Devourer ground forces was everything Jake had hoped for. Human orbital support combined with Valkani ground tactics proved unstoppable. The machines that had seemed invincible 3 months ago crumbled before the combined assault. They could not adapt fast enough to counter both human technology and Valkani determination. Jake fought alongside Zara in the final push toward the old capital. They moved like partners who had trained together for years, covering each other's weaknesses and amplifying each other's strengths. When the last Devourer fell, there was no cheering. The Valkani were too exhausted, and the humans were too amazed by what they had witnessed. "Your people are remarkable," Admiral Barnes told Jake during the post-battle briefing. "We could learn a lot from them." "And they could learn from us," Jake replied. "This does not have to be the end of our cooperation." 6 months later, Jake stood in the same canyon where he had first met Zara. But now it was transformed. A monument to the fallen warriors rose.